We're back. Welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today's guest is Katie. Actually, Katie, I always ask beforehand, and we've known each other for a while, so I didn't ask. Kinnemeyer?
Kinnemeyer, yes.
There we go. Welcome, Katie, to the show. Today, we're having a conversation about building connection and raving fans. And I want to set this up a little bit because I have focused for a really long time on creating programs that are much more, or content that's much more educational focused, where we're focusing on strategies and tactics. And I've taught workshops and classes on different things. But what I've found is that it doesn't turn people into raving fans. You can have something that changes somebody's life where they go through your program and they implement it, and it's like they'll even tell you, this is amazing, it's changed the way I operate in my business, whatever. But then that doesn't necessarily mean that person's going to show up to all of your events, or they're going to join your community and be active in it. And so there's been this disconnect for me personally, and I've seen this with other folks too, between sharing an idea and helping people make a transformation in their business, to turning into a raving fan. And so I wanted to have you on because you and I have been having a lot of conversations about, well, how do you actually create those raving fans by building connection with them? So really excited to dive into that with you today.
Yes. Thanks for having me on your show. I'm excited to take some of the conversations we've been having public.
Yeah. So I just will set this up by saying, this is definitely where you play, right? This is kind of your arena of working with people on their workshops, in-person events, speaking engagements to a degree, but basically, okay, you've gotten this person's attention. They want to work with you. They've come to your workshop or your group coaching or whatever. How do you go from just being the person who's giving them facts or implementation or whatever to being somebody who they want to follow, or they want to join into what you're doing for the long haul and really buy into that? And so the first thing I want to ask you is just, why do you think there's that disconnect? So when you're looking at somebody like me, I've created tons of content, I've created programs, I've educated people, I've worked with businesses. Where do you think that disconnect is between that and creating raving fans?
So, people who are creating that kind of content, those kinds of programs, we inherently have to deliver a promise. And to deliver that promise, to deliver different results, we know certain strategies and tactics. That's how we package our expertise. We know certain strategies and tactics that get you to deliver, that get somebody to those results. And that's where people focus on delivering that content. But the gap when you have an experience where, say, you run a workshop or you run a course program, the person delivers, they might apply your strategies and tactics super successfully, but then they just go back off into their own world. And they never come back around and stay involved in any more of your offerings, or if you have a community or kind of the ecosystem that you're creating. It's usually because they haven't been connected into kind of the broader idea that you're plugged into. And so where I see the big gap is people who are they're delivering the strategies and tactics, but they're not delivering a sense of belonging to the broader idea. So Joseph, for you talk a lot about one conversation can change everything. Building genuine relationships is actually the way to build business, and you're shifting people away from the transactional nature of sales. And so for you and anything that you would build out as an offering, and let me just name, like, everything I do is when you have a group live together, not necessarily like a digital self-paced course. But the getting people to be tapped into the power of building genuine relationships. And everybody's built genuine relationships in their lives. So to be able to
Yep.
source into how I've already done that, how do I bring that into and like weave that into the new skills you're teaching? And that process, like that approach to creating and delivering content, gives people an experience of themselves, of each other, and the thing that you know that you're inviting them into. And that's what's going to start building this sense of deeper connection versus the strategies and tactics that those are just things I need to go off and do. Those aren't necessarily anything that is in my heart and soul and like feeds me and fills me up and propels me forward as I do that out in the world.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we could all think of examples. I think the person who comes to mind for me with this topic is going to be Dave Ramsey, and I talk about him a decent amount because I think he does an incredible job at this. He is teaching a philosophy, but what he's ultimately done is gotten people to step back and look at themselves and say, "Hey, what do you value? What's important to you?" Start with that, and then he's really pulling together people who share a certain philosophy where they go, "Hey, I shouldn't be spending more than what I'm making. And if I can't afford it, I shouldn't buy it." And then the more that people buy into his program, the more they become like that. And the more they become like that, the more they identify with other people who have gone through the same thing. And so then, you meet somebody out in the wild who's paid off $50,000 in debt and done their debt free scream. You're going to have connection with that person. And so you're connecting not only on the fact that you've done the same strategies and tactics, but you're connecting on something deeper like worldview, philosophy, an idea about who you are, about who they are. And then Dave Ramsey is really more of a catalyst for those individual people to come together and have a shared worldview more than it's about him and his ideas themselves. Is that
Exactly. So I see the most influential creators, conveners, gatherers, they're the ones who know that it's not about them. They are not there to be the guru. They are there to essentially kind of propose the perspective or the philosophy and invite people into a relationship with that, like you said, within themselves and with each other. And that's what gets woven into the best program experiences. Again, it's not just here are the things you go do, but the constant touching in on what does this mean for me? What does this mean about who I am? And that's another thing that when I am helping design these kinds of programs, the other piece I look at it is it's a journey because you are taking somebody from who they are today, you're meeting them where they are, and then you know where you want to get them. You know where you want to get them in mind, heart, and spirit. And frankly, body. Like there's a whole nervous system thing that we could go into here in terms of what it means to do something different out in the world, what it means to try on a new identity and then be in that. And people aren't used to you being in that, which is really important to create that sense of camaraderie within your program, within your group, because you've got your people. You're not alone
yeah?
in it. And so it's a culture building, it's connection building, it's camaraderie, there's collaboration. Um, and it
Wait, let
is
me pause you really quick because you're using these words that I feel like sometimes people can just automatically tune out with, but they're really important. And so I want to dive into this a little bit deeper with what you're saying. So um, when we're talking about connecting with people on a deeper level like that, it it does actually impact business, right? So I think sometimes we separate way too much the business from people, and there's reasons for that. And I'm not discounting the reasons that we have to have margins and profit in our business and all of that, right? But if we want to influence people, if we want to have genuine influence, then we have to think about these things, right? And humans are not AI machines, and we never will be, right? So there's all of these pieces of humans that are not logical, right? That's where some of the like marketing philosophies or even growth or creating these programs to help people teach people, if people were logical, they would just follow exactly this path, and it could be a science, and you do this one, you put in this input and this output comes out. But people don't work that way. People are emotional. Everybody is. Even the most logical people still have emotional things going on inside of them. They have these deeper wants and desires. They have an identity. And sometimes that identity is, I'm the logical person in the room and I'm not going to be swayed by my emotion. And that's still it's still an identity piece, right? So if we can understand that and not discount it and go, hey, if we can tap into what people are actually looking to achieve in their life and help them get in touch with what they want, connect with other people who want the same thing, and then share the strategies and tactics and ideas that are going to help them get there, we're actually going to have genuine influence. And it's going to go beyond the transactional idea of, hey, you gave me this educational thing that helped me achieve my goal, to you changed my life. And now I've connected with this new group of people that now think the way that I think and that I want to walk with, for the long haul.
And that I belong to and they belong to me, and we know how to contribute to each other. I think some of the things that I want to piggyback on with what you're speaking to is not only are people coming with just kind of their personality and who they are, but they're coming with history and baggage and narratives that they have about themselves, about how the world works. And that's something that for them to be really successful in applying the philosophy and the strategies and tactics that you're offering, those need to be dismantled and then replaced with something new. And so that's what I'm speaking to when I talk about journey and meeting them where they are, to give people the opportunity in a group setting. It's so powerful to do this in a group setting, to give people the opportunity to just gently come into relationship with, okay, here's the philosophy. We're bringing you into relationship with what are the possibilities that this philosophy could bring in your life. Like, you're here, you've paid for this experience, you know it can do something for your life. Let's start to surface that, because to your point, we're coming with fears and desires. Let's start, which those things exist deep within us. That's where they're sourced. And so let's bring those to the surface. Let's give them a little bit of air and light and let them exist there, because that's the only time and place that we're actually going to be able to turn those into something that we're willing to let go of and we're willing to replace things with. And a lot of people create course programs and they just kind of deliver the content in a group setting. But there are really powerful ways of, one of the things I like to say, leveraging the individual for the group's benefit and leveraging the group for the individual's benefit. So this idea of, let me take an example of, at the very beginning of any experience, it might be a half-day workshop, it might be a 3-month-long program. You could start with a question where it's kind of like, all right, let's get to know each other. Why was it important for you to be here? Why was it important for you to invest in this thing? What do you want to get out of it? Just hearing each other's stories in that, A, you're starting to get to know the people you're in this experience with. B, me as an individual, I'm starting to get to surface why I'm actually here. Because I booked this probably a while ago, and then I just showed up because it was on my calendar. But to connect, for you as the leader to connect me back into my reason for being here, you're stirring up my own intrinsic motivation. I'm hearing everyone else. In the process of hearing everyone else, I'm actually witnessing them. So not only is the power of sharing myself in play, but the power of being witnessed and received is also being in play. And that's where we come back to the power of influence. What influence is you wanting for another person what they want for themselves. If you show to somebody that you want for them what they want for themselves, they are going to trust you. They are going to follow your guidance. And to be able to ask some really powerful questions and give space during the delivery of your workshop or your program, whatever that experience is, to give them the space to be seen and heard is going to develop that deeper trust between them and you, among the people who are in the room together, and in the context of developing their own relationship to that philosophy. So there's this like multi-layer thing happening with some really simple techniques and ways of asking questions to the group and ways of holding them in a culture of, we're going to listen to what's here for each other.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting because I feel, again, like the language that you're using, and I feel the same thing when I'm talking to people about, hey, we need to build genuine relationships. In a way, it's stuff that we all know. Like anytime I've talked to a group of 50 to a couple hundred people, and I'm asking a question from stage or panel, where do your best clients come from? Everybody says relationships and referrals. I mean, occasionally you'll get like one or two people out of a room of 200 that say cold calling or something. And it's like, okay, well, you're weird. And you also might not be being totally honest either. But, you know, the majority of people, their best clients came from existing relationships, referrals, their network. And that's because they've nurtured that. They've gone to in-person events, but they built these deep relationships. But then when you use a word like relationships, people automatically push back against that. And they're like, oh, that's not businessy enough. But it's like, but it's actually what drives the majority of business. If you're a consultant, you know, you sell anything over like $1,000, relationship, reputation, authority, those things are what drive it. And those are not transactional words. Those aren't, we're not talking about your ROI and your, you know, these like, you can't put relationships on a spreadsheet and crunch the math. I mean, you kind of can, but it doesn't fit into that. Like, and maybe I'll say it this way. The terms that we're talking about, they're not terms you'll learn when you get your MBA, right? And so because companies have leaned so heavily into the idea that you can just like put your entire business on a spreadsheet and put this in on one side and this will come out on the other, we stay away from all these kinds of words. But I just want to pause there and go, think about any kind of group that you've been a part of. Now, let's just take this even outside of business. Like if it's a church community and you go to a small group, you feel connection with those people because you share common beliefs. And, you know, if you're going to, or, you know, somebody who's dealing with recovery and they go to AA meetings, right? The people who I've met who have done AA and they were meth addicts and then, you know, 5 years later, they're clean. They still identify very deeply with AA and with the people that they met there. And, you know, they've built this deep connection that goes way beyond the moment and has become a way of life and a way of thinking and an identity. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at. Like you can, as a business, now it kind of depends on what you sell, but let's just say you're a consultant or you're selling some kind of an idea or a way of doing things or a framework, or you want to be a thought leader and you want people to respect you in your space. You want to have influence. You have to go beyond what could be written on a page. You have to go beyond the educational piece, and you have to connect deep down with people in an intrinsic way. And you have to speak to things, to your point, that are way deeper than just the surface level, like strategies, tactics, frameworks, and all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, my hypothesis is, my observation is, the things that businesses focus on, they focus on because it gives us a sense of control over the things that we can do something about. It gives us something like setting revenue goals, setting activity plans, setting deadlines. We do all of that in an effort to drive predictable growth and like see the outcomes we're trying to see. What all of those things that are heavily operationalized don't let me see, how do I want to say this? The things that people think are touchy-feely, they have not, there aren't a lot of people out there who have thought about how do we operationalize relationships, which even saying it that way, let me say it this way. How do we operationalize connection? Which even saying it that way starts to like, my brain goes off and says, "Ooh, that sounds manipulative," which is gross and icky and like still kind of doing like not serving anything. But where I come from it at, the place that I come at it from is, we are human beings with like, let me just take it down to things that can be tactical, tangibly observed. We have nervous systems. We have nervous systems that react to stimuli. stimuli in the business world, and particularly, okay, let's talk about like a group program, a 3-month program where everybody's meeting once a week, and even on Zoom, I'll speak to. How am I as a human being showing up, and like just looking at it purely from a nervous system perspective? When I join that group call on Zoom, you as the leader, you have no idea what kind of day I'm coming from, but you know that you need me to be focused, present, and engaged. And you know that you want to leave me feeling really good about spending an hour or 2 hours with you. So you like the place where we get to operationalize connection is leveraging connection to settle our nervous systems so that I can be present, engaged, and focused, and actually have the space to take in what you're talking about. Have the space to show up and share vulnerably, honestly, like raw what there is for me to share, which benefits the entire group. So to take it down to that level, I'll back it up a little bit too. I'm working with a group that they host a 13-week program. They do it in person, and every week people show up for a day-long session. And the first week is 2 days in a row. And the process in the beginning is they get interviewed, they have to apply, they get interviewed, they get accepted. So there's a little bit of relationship building at the very beginning. But then that very first day, I just had a conversation with them yesterday about this. Like, what happens when they show up to that room? Who's greeting them? Is it somebody they've already met? And there was some conversation where it's like, actually, in the past, it's been somebody who they've had a little bit of experience with, but they decided, let's make sure that the person greeting them isn't going to get pulled away from the greeting table, because there's a lot kind of going on. So that means that we need to be prepared so that that person can stand there. And then when they come into the room and have breakfast at the beginning of the day, kind of, we can all relate to, I'm showing up to a place, I don't know anybody, I know I'm here for a good reason for myself, but like that kind of crossing over the threshold into the community, like, I don't know who else is here with me. And I don't know how they're going to feel about me. And it's just like weird sometimes just showing up to things like that. And I have to go get breakfast and sit down. Is there going to be somebody to sit down next to? Am I going to sit down at a table by myself? And so we had a conversation with the team, and I said, hey, like, how many people, let's say there's 20 people that are going to be there. How many people are going to be sitting in, like, how many tables are there going to be for people to sit at? If there's 4 tables, okay, let's make sure there's somebody from the team or an alumni or like somebody from the program staff sitting, like, able to receive people when they come into that next layer of the experience. Because ultimately, what I'm focused on is what that felt experience of starting the program is. I want them to feel received. I want them to feel supported. I want them to feel welcomed. And you can imagine that if I feel robustly received when I start a thing, I'm going to trust that you've got my back, and I'm going to be robustly supported the entire way through.
Well, let's I want to make this super practical with what you're saying. What is it that people want to get out of a group program? Like if you're leading a program, and we've been talking at this from the angle of, hey, this group program is something that you're selling a workshop or something like that, right? But let's take a slightly different angle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're the CEO of a company, and you're going to run a series of meetings to get your team aligned on the vision of the company moving forward. It's super easy, and let's say it's your leadership team that you're having these meetings with, and they're going to kind of distribute this idea to their direct reports. Anybody can sit down and bark out orders and say, here's what we're doing. This is the direction we're going. Here's why. Here's all the reasons. We've already thought through all of them. Let's go. The problem you're going to run into with that is implementation, right? Everybody can say yes. Everybody can agree. Everybody could say, yeah, this is the most solid plan. They might even give you some feedback here and there on why that plan is important. But what you're not going to get is somebody who's going to go the extra mile on your leadership team and get buy-in for the other people on their team, because they haven't connected with the idea. They haven't connected with it. And when I talk to people who are trying to make a change in their business, whatever it is, it could be anything from bringing in an IT vendor and making sure that they solve the problem, bringing in that kind of change, or website development project, or you're going to implement a new hour tracking system in your business, whether you're the vendor or you're the person buying it, what do you want to have happen? You want to have that be successful for people to actually follow through on it and do it consistently for the long haul. So
Mhm.
ultimately what you're getting at and what you're helping people do is go, hey, those are all things that only work if the people on the front line are actually deeply connected to the overall idea. It speaks to something that's important to them, that's meaningful to them, that they're willing to sacrifice for the greater good of the greater good, but how that benefits them as a person. That could
Yes.
be their career growth. It could be, that they'll have more time to focus on things that they want. But if you don't tap into and connect with those emotional things that people are experiencing, even if they don't say it out loud, or even if they don't know what it is themselves, your chances of whatever you're trying to implement being successful are extremely low. And if you start realizing that you're dealing with people and that people aren't robots and you can't just replace them with somebody else and get a better result necessarily, like that, it's more complicated than that, then we have to start paying attention to things like people actually being able to be present. And they've got things going on in their life. And if we don't acknowledge that, we're just not going to actually be successful, or as successful as we could be.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about, and I hear a lot about kind of that scenario of change management. Executive leadership says, hey, this needs to change. Okay, management starts to cascade that down to the organization. And when it's delivered, those kinds of techniques in the change management world, there's a lot where it's like, here's how you communicate it, here's how you kind of push it through. But then think about the people receiving that, and the way that they're receiving it. They're basically being told, this is the change we've decided. And that makes people feel like a cog in a machine, which also signals, hey, this sense of autonomy and contribution and ownership that every organization like wants their people to have. At the surface, they say that. Not all are designed to actually implement on that. But if you feel someone like a cog in a machine, you're going to disconnect them from that sense of I know how I can contribute value to this moment. But if you involve people in the conversations, even if you make a decision and like, this is the direction we're going no matter what, the way you roll that out and enroll people in those conversations, you're not necessarily looking to enroll people in those conversations so that they can try to give input that sends the plan in a different direction. That enrollment should have been done up front before those decisions were made. But that sense of, how does this affect you and what does this mean for you? And yes, like, let's just take a moment for you to be able to speak to like what this stirs up for you. And people, I think for the in the name of speed and efficiency and like, it's time, like, we got to push this plan out, they don't take the moment to deliver the content, like deliver the plan in a way that does get people a chance to speak their mind about it. And they don't know how to create the conditions for people to speak their mind in a way that sets up expectations that like, we're hearing you, but we're not necessarily going to change the plan. But it's really powerful to give people the opportunity to be heard.
Yep.
And again, to come back to like hearing themselves and giving them the opportunity to hear each other. And then to operationalize, okay, like whatever comes up from there, is there something we need to move on? Is there something we just need to acknowledge? Like, there's different ways of responding to that. But again, coming back to that felt experience, you want people to feel involved, even if they're not. You want people to feel empowered, as they're the ones that have to actually make some of those changes and implement. And on that change management scenario, that usually introduces some chaos and some uncertainty to their environment for a little while. And so to be able to give them the space to acknowledge those concerns, those questions, in a way that still makes them feel like they're a part of the thing, then that's a much more powerful approach than just kind of shoving it down their throats and assuming that they're going to be okay with it.
Yeah, and it isn't efficient to roll out a really efficient plan and have the people who actually are responsible for implementing it not do it, which is what
That,
often happens.
and I
So the
think,
more efficient thing is to actually recognize what is going on and connect with people. So well, I want to, because we've been chatting for 30 minutes. We could chat about this for hours, but I just want to I want to leave people with something a little bit tangible, and then if people want to implement the stuff in their programs, they should just talk to you, and they can
yeah,
kind of get a deeper idea of what it looks like in practice, because we've been talking more theory, right? But as I've said, I like practical things and implementation and all that. So I want to give a real world example, and we'll just kind of talk through this piece of it real quick.
yeah.
So I've started to develop a methodology for helping people have more conversations with the right people by starting a live show. And then for more of these small business owners, that then tease into this idea of how to become a thought leader where people are actually paying attention to what you have to say. And how do you do that practically if you're not currently a thought leader, right? So that comes down to developing a program. And I've run a group coaching cohort, and I'm planning to run another one. In the past, I focused very heavily on the content piece, like we've talked about. Okay, I've got the content, I've got worksheets, I've got that stuff, and I'm really good at helping people implement. I'm very good at that. When I teach people how to do something, the majority of people actually do it successfully. But then the question is, like we've said, we're missing that next component of them joining into more of that long-term raving fan, being involved in the community, helping other people who are doing the same thing. And ultimately, that's for their own good, because the people who have stayed connected are still doing it. And the people who haven't, a good portion of them are not able to maintain this on their own. They need that group to follow through. So anyway, the practical piece is, okay, so I've got my program, I've got my presentations, I've got the implementation piece down. As I'm thinking about designing this program, and even just like the first meeting, when I'm thinking about that first meeting, what are some things I need to consider to really pull people in from the beginning and create that sense of connection, kicking off that program?
So, what I'll say is that you need to take a perspective of pouring into them so that they can pour themselves into the thing you're leading them into. So pouring into them could look like a conversation that you give everybody a chance to kind of respond to around, like, what, again, it's kind of touching in on, why is this important to you? Why is it important for you to take on the challenge of running a LinkedIn Live show, to take on the challenge of putting yourself out there, which feels very risky to a bunch of people, to increase that
Yeah.
sense of visibility? But for you to open up the opportunity for them to tap into what's the part that compels them to do this, and for you to continue tapping them into that, giving them the opportunity to touch in on that every time they get together, it stirs up that intrinsic motivation that also helps kind of grease the skids for overcoming the challenges and the resistance. So whenever there's a moment where it's like, oh gosh, I'm reaching out to somebody who's a big player in my industry that would be such an awesome guest on my show, but that gives me butterflies and there's resistance, and like, how
Yeah.
are they going to receive me? Are they even going to open up my email? For them to be so solidly anchored in what they want to, why they want to do it for themselves, what they want to get out of it, what they're building for the future, for you to continually bring them back into that throughout the course of your program helps them overcome that resistance really easily, right? It builds the faith, it builds the identity that they are, so that they can really easily handle those challenges. Did I answer that as tactically as you wanted me to answer that?
Yeah,
It's
I
like
mean,
a
I think
little
it's,
bit
yeah,
technical.
I think that is really interesting, because it's basically like, okay, look, people are going to run into challenges in implementing whatever it is you're doing? Are they connected enough to their own desire or their own reasoning for doing this thing to see through the challenges? Like,
Yes.
you're going to have a guest that doesn't show up to your LinkedIn live. You're going to have, and you're going to, have to figure out what you're going to do in that moment. Or you're going to get on a live and you're going to have internet connections and you're going to, it's going to look silly. Or you're going to have somebody who's going to come on and they're just really a bad guest and the conversation's horrible. Or you're going to finish the conversation, you're going to be in your post interview conversation with somebody and you're going to say the wrong thing and they're going to get upset at you and feel like you were just tricking them into a sales conversation or something. And through all of that, if they aren't connected to their own reasoning for doing it, there's not going to be enough motivation for them to actually follow through. So like we're saying, for their own good, they need to be connected into themselves and see how the other people are going through that same experience and have that sense of connection. Otherwise, they're not going to have the tools they need to actually overcome. So then practically, I like that you're starting with some those questions that get people to just say out loud what they're doing. And then, creating that sense of connection with the other people in the group. So if we're going back to Dave Ramsey, I mean, they do build that stuff into their, they have these groups that meet together that go through the journey together. And they have these different thing, people share about, hey, this is how much debt I have, here's my income, here's what I'm doing, and you're kind of sharing all of those things together. And then they always say, like, look, you and your spouse, if you're married, need to get on the same page and you have to have a goal together that's stronger than what you each want individually. So in other words, like, we want to buy a house. That is more important than going to Target and getting a new pair of jeans or going out and getting a beer with your buddies. And if you don't have that goal solidified together as a team and then communicate that to the group and hear what other people are saying and kind of connect into that, you're not going to have the strength to drive by Target or say, hey guys, I can't make it tonight, I'm saving money to buy a house, and then your friends are going to go, you're an idiot, why would you do that, just come hang out this once. You're not going to have the fortitude to go, no, if you don't have that identity, that goal that's bigger, and then that community around you who's going to cheer you on to do it.
The other ideas I'll add into that is what that turns into is resilience and responsiveness. I mean, if you've got that really strong sense of, I know what I'm going for, and I know, like, even as I execute this plan and I get redirected because it's not happening the way I thought it was, you have more resilience. It's going to be easier to find the redirect, find the new path. Whereas if you're not as connected to what that goal is and you don't feel the support of that camaraderie, it's easy to just kind of collapse and maybe waste a couple of days in a sense of confusion. And then that's where the responsiveness comes in. I mean, I think that the sense of that knowing within yourself, which starts to create the more deeply and more strongly that knowing is anchored in yourself, starts to create your own inner authority. That starts to develop courage for you to take on whatever you need to take on. Having a sense of camaraderie with people who are also on that journey with you in their own way, in their own life, but they are walking that path with you. You guys are constantly reminding each other that you've got this. And where some people might be having some success and some smooth riding and other people's are struggling, that's going to flip one day and you're still all going to be there for each other in that, and watching each other on that journey. You're going to trust what the support, advice, encouragement is coming from those other people, which is going to continue building this virtuous cycle of resilience and your ability to respond quickly to whatever you need to respond to. So I think that sense of connection does so much good for us. Not to mention, we didn't even talk about any of the like scientifically evidence-based reasons why connection is good for us and makes us healthier in our bodies makes us more resilient and more easily responsive to what needs to happen. But that can ladder up to the business results too, and how we're all, that sense of being in it together and still marching the path we've decided to march, because some way, shape, or form, we are going to hit that goal. And to have
Yep.
people with you who also have faith that you're going to hit that goal, because they're in it with you, they believe in this process, they're in the process, they've invested in this process just as much as you've invested. So why wouldn't we believe that we're all going to hit that goal?
Yeah, and just to kind of make it a little bit tangible with what that looks like in practice, just from our conversation so far, it's really stepping. I mean, you need to have your content where you're teaching people, and you need to have your materials that people fill out, and you need a slide deck at certain points in time, or things like that. But what you've helped me to see is that you also need maybe not even as much content as you think you need. You need to add in some space for people to talk to each other, to practice some things that you're talking about together, to build that connection, not only with the people in you. That kind of happens naturally just by them paying you and them showing up in the room and you sharing things. Like that builds connection with you. It's that connection that they build together around this idea that's they want for themselves but is bigger than just them. That's where you get that raving, that's where you get raving fans. And so
Yes.
it's slowing down and looking at your program and going, I need to add some space in this program for connection. So instead of just thinking I'm going to take an hour or 90 minutes or whatever your sessions are, and I'm just going to pack that with as much content wall to wall as I can, it's saying, okay, I'm going to take this hour and I'm going to make sure I've got a good 25, 30 minutes within that, and add in these questions that I'm going to ask to the group, and add in some breakouts or whatever it looks like, to let people connect together, for them to share their own perspective, their own experience, their own stories. And it's when you leave that room for people to be vulnerable, that's really kind of what you help teach people how to do. Is
Yep.
that right?
Yeah, and it's amazing, as much as people think that connection slows things down and it's inefficient, it speeds up a lot of, like, you have no idea how fast it can make things happen. I've been in meetings, like, kind of in the corporate space or on teams, we're trying to do things, um, and call it a 60-minute meeting. We checked in on just kind of, hey, like, a simple check-in question. How are you arriving today? And I've seen meetings that had an agenda that was, the entire hour was packed. We need every single minute of that meeting to get through the content we needed to get through and make the decisions we needed to make. But I've seen meetings where the check-in took a half an hour, took 30 minutes of the meeting, and that hour-long agenda was resolved in the next 15 minutes after that check-in. I
Hmm.
have seen that exact situation play out time and time again. And so that's where I think people, going back to, connection can be unpredictable. You don't know what's going to happen organically. You can't force connection
Hmm.
into a certain set of results. But when you actually trust that something will happen and you start playing with those approaches and integrating them into how you gather people, and for whatever reason you're gathering them, you're going to see that actually things are happening a lot more faster and a lot more organically than you could have ever designed them to do through those transactional pieces that you think you can control.
Yeah, I love that. And then, just to put a bow on it, neither of us are saying, hey, you should ignore or not operationalize things, but it's that you need to operationalize, like you were saying, you need to build in room for human connection. And that's going to help all the operational things that you're wanting to see happen much more effectively, much more fluidly. That no amount of just having a checkbox is going to do. And that's true whether you're trying to get people to um, that's true whether you're trying to get people to buy something from you, or buy into your idea, or implement or have success in your program. It's true if they're employees and you're trying to get them to buy into the vision. And it's true if they're volunteers in your organization. whatever the case is, if you want to have influence, those people have to feel connected to you and to each other and to themselves. And if they don't have that, there's going to be a disconnect, and you're going to spend a huge portion of your time cleaning up messes instead of going after what you're actually trying to achieve. And that nobody wants to do that. So with that, Katie, thanks for joining and having this conversation. If you have a group program or you're looking to get people to connect better so you can achieve what you're looking to achieve much more effectively, or you have raving fans and genuine influence and all of that, definitely talk with Katie. She's got some great programs and brings a lot to the table and helping figure out how to do that practically. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me, Joseph. This was fun.
And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.